How did you guys meet? How did you get
Okay,
working
all
together?
right. So this goes back to, I think, about 1974. And at that time, Joe was practicing law. It was quite a combination with Ted Baldwin. Joe had left, I think, Wigan and Dana, and Ted had also been at Wigan and Dana, and Joe and Ted had been the manager of the Long Wharf Theater. So these two, if you knew their background back then and their interests, they needed help with a real lawyer. When I say that, I mean someone who was really committed to practicing law all the time, not politics, not the theater. So we found each other, and we started our practice together, and that went on for a number of years through the time that Joe was elected to the Attorney General's position, and that he had committed to making that a full-time job. And and Ted earlier had gone on to, at some point in time, became a judge. So there I was, and I ended up at some point coming to where I am now at Sussman, Duffy, and Segelhoff, and that's been about 35 years.
Mid 70s, obviously, you had political ambitions. Did you have a sense of how far those political ambitions could take Joe?
I'm not sure, for sure, I couldn't have imagined it would take him to a vice presidential candidacy. But it was clear to me that he was focused on his career.
Right.
I mean, I can give you one example that I remember distinctly. He was the senator. He was a state senator, and I think in his second term, he had been elected. And the next morning, he was at the office early, which was unusual. He was at the office and making notes, and I said, "Joe, what are you doing?" He was making calls and thinking in terms of a selection by his colleagues to be the Senate Majority Leader. So it was sort of classic in a very positive way, but focused on where he was going, what he was doing, and sure enough, as I recall it, I think that was his second term, maybe his third. It's a long time ago. That he was selected to the Senate Majority Leader, and then that just kept moving forward. And I guess some of the well, I do want to make one point that I'm thinking about after his loss, which is certainly it was hard. The death itself is sad and horrible, but the way it all happened is just very, very upsetting. But he was interested. What I want to say is I think in these times, I want to talk. I'd like to at least share with you his commitment to his religion. I'm Jewish. Don't follow many customs. I get to synagogue once a year, maybe. Not about me, but about Joe. He was committed to his orthodoxy. And I can remember a number of occasions where Governor Grasso would call on a Friday, and maybe it was late in the day, and the secretary in our office would say, I'll see if I can get the senator, and the governor would say, okay, I know the sun sets in another half hour, and it's Shabbos for him, but I'd like to see if I might be able to talk to him before he leaves. And he was committed to that. It wasn't a show. It was a very deep feeling about who he was. And without making a speech, it strikes me today with all that's going on, and particularly what I see in, among other things, with anti-Semitism, people respected him for that. And I think that was a special, really a special thing, particularly these days as you look back on it. And I will share with you one other story I remember. When we first got together, I didn't really appreciate just how strongly he felt about his religion. and I had been in the office on a Saturday. Of course, I'm working away on a Saturday, and the mail arrived. And I opened it up. It was a check we'd been waiting for. And in those days, every check, they still are to me, but every check was important. So I was so excited, I grabbed the check, and I drove to his house on Colony Road in New Haven. And he knew that we were looking forward to this check. I said, "Joe, look at this." And I handed the check, and he pushed away. I thought for first something I said, and then I understood that on the Sabbath, he would not handle money. I wasn't hesitant, by the way, to take it and deposit it the next Monday, but in any event, just another example, I think, of how strongly he felt.
I got to spend some time with him over the years. I was always impressed by his wit. He was a funny guy, I thought.
Well,
But I only got to see him in certain
Right,
circumstances.
right. Well, again, a little bit about me. I always thought he didn't come close to as funny as I was, but that's really not the point. He had his own style. He did have a wit, but I think you had to appreciate it, and he was involved in a lot of serious issues and times where it wasn't necessarily appropriate to be too witty. But well, I didn't see a change per se in him. I would say I think one of the reasons that our relationship was successful. It was not just a business relationship; it was a personal relationship. Was that I left it to him to do his political thing, if you will, and I never ever tried to give him any advice, whether I thought I agreed 100% or not. Clearly, from my perception, from the somewhat, I guess you don't say liberal these days, the progressive attitude he had or viewpoints he had when he finished Yale Law School, over time changed, I think, significantly. But I felt that I would not get involved with that, he had all kinds of advisors. I didn't think it was for me to advise him politically. But it no doubt over time changed right to today, or the no labels issue. But
What a lot of politicians have said about him is that, sort of like his Orthodox Judaism, he had a set of principles, and whatever anybody thought about it, whatever everyone else was trying to get him to do, he stuck to his principles.
yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Not because he's passed away and it's a nice thing to say. I watched that. I mean, you have to look back at his comments when President Clinton had his situation with Monica Lewinsky, and Joe got up and said it was a moral outrage. I knew him, I think, very, very well in those years, and that wasn't probably the most political thing to say. Sitting president, and he was in the minority with that point of view, but it was sort of a classic example where if he believed in something, I would say certainly if he believed in something based on his religious principles, he talked about it or made a comment about it. And I think he would, as I said, Kent, what I really did respect and always respected was if he believed in it, he said it. He didn't. The political thing certainly was not to get involved with Monica and Bill. That's for sure.
Very little upside to that for him, yeah, especially within the Democratic Party. What was it like seeing him at those highest levels? You went to Nashville on election night. We didn't get a result on election night, but I mean, you're there in the middle of it.
It was very exciting. I look back on our 50 years. That's a lot of years that we knew each other. And we didn't stayed in touch with each other over most of that time. It was exciting, and somehow, if someone said this is Lieberman's law partner, it meant something. It didn't. It was sort of silly. I mean, I can tell you, bring you back a memory. I went to Kentucky when he had the debate with Cheney I think, yes, with Cheney. And so I sat next to someone, had no idea who he was, and he asked me how I got this ticket. And I said, well, I'm Joe Lieberman's law partner. He said, oh, I'm the Attorney General of Kentucky. So sure enough, when this was all over, he gave me a call and said, I've been nominated to be a Kentucky colonel, and I can go now to the Kentucky Derby and sit right there at the center. And other than the fact that I didn't really care for horses, it didn't seem to be an invitation I would accept, but it was just, here I was, Lieberman's law partner. It somehow, to some people, it became a big deal. And I have all kinds of material that talks about me being a Kentucky colonel. I have no idea what that really means. I think it means giving a donation every year.
Sounds like it should entail some free fried chicken somewhere.
Yeah, I never thought about the chicken. That's a good point. So it was very exciting. The Tennessee trip was mind-boggling in hindsight, and going to bed that night not knowing who won. And I guess another event that I remember very distinctly was I went down to Florida when they were counting Chads. And I believe I went with Clarine Riddle, who at that time may have been the Attorney General, a judge. I'm embarrassed, I don't really remember back then. But it was just exciting. This is the Lieberman group going to be counting Chads. Unfortunately, we weren't counting them for the Supreme Court, but it was just another life experience being connected to him.
And to kind of wrap up here, it was a big deal having the first Jewish person on a national ticket. Here we are 24 years later, and we are still dealing with, as you mentioned, anti-Semitism and things like that going on in the world today. What should be the lasting thing we remember about Joe Lieberman and how he kind of elevated the Jewish community to the highest levels there and said, hey, not just Connecticut, the United States is ready for a Jewish vice president, if not for a few hundred hanging Chads in Florida, would be our first Jewish vice president?
Well, first, without answering it directly, it is sad and unfortunate that what's going on out there now. It's not whether it's Jews, Muslims, Black Americans, the whole situation, and the partisanship. I don't mean to, but and that's, you don't see that anywhere now. And here was someone who stood up years ago, and it was a different environment, but dealt with it. In regard to the specific question, I think to a great extent, whether he was Jewish or Muslim or whatever religion, the idea that he believed in something beyond himself, beyond getting elected, beyond making a lot of money, he believed in the tenets of his religion. And that was a very special thing. I don't know how others feel these days, and I wouldn't be judgmental, but that was something that I think we could take away from how he carried on his life and what really meant to him that was of prime importance.
I think it's a very good answer to that question.